everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Nick Crosson. I'm with Pennsylvania Humanities. I do research here, and I'm the host for this session, which is a Pecha Kucha session. And I hope many of you know, and many of you may have experienced it. Pecha Kucha is a storytelling style of presentation, normally done in a PowerPoint or other type of slides. And my understanding is it means chit-chat in Japanese. So that's really what we're going to do today. And we have recruited lovely people from around the country to join us from other humanities councils, because I want to say my favorite part of these research gatherings really is getting to hear what other people are doing in their councils, partially to steal ideas, but also partially just because I think people are doing really interesting work. And that's how I hear about it, is on these calls. And that's why I join these calls, and I love to see who comes with us. And so really, I basically reached out to the people who I had heard from over the past year on these calls, who I thought were doing really interesting stuff. I reached out to about 7 or 8 people, and we got some great responses. So we are going to hear from, in order, we're going to hear from Tom Beasley at Washington Humanities. He's going to share a project he's been working on with Salesforce. Then we're going to hear from Lian and Becky from Connecticut Humanities, and they're going to be talking about a project they did with a consultant on their grants program. And then lastly, I'm going to share some work that Pennsylvania Humanities has done on a survey. And I think my view is that probably lots of different councils have done lots of different of these things. So after each presentation, they're going to be short. Pecha Kucha is 20 seconds per slide, 20 slides. That works out to like about 6 minutes. So after each session, we're just going to stop and have a little chit chat with the person who was working on it for probably about another 10 minutes, and maybe save a little bit of time for the end for a wrap up or other discussion. But that's about it. That's what we're going to do. This is just a great way to learn a little bit more about some of the projects that people are doing, and then hopefully to talk amongst ourselves for people who are doing similar things or want to do similar things, tips, tricks, pratfalls, pitfalls, that sort of thing. So without further ado, thank you everyone for coming, and I'm going to turn it over to Tom. Tom, go to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Nick, for organizing. So yeah, let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. Is everyone able to see my PowerPoint? Okay, great. So my name's Tom Beasley. I am the Technology and Evaluations Manager at Humanities Washington, and I'll be talking a bit about a tool we've been building to help us out with advocacy on our database Salesforce. All right, so I've got a photo of some of my wonderful colleagues at the Washington State Capitol, Olympia, Jarrah-Lego, Stone Addington, Georgia Beta. And I put this at the front because I wanted to just be mindful of the fact that the real work of advocacy happens by nurturing and cultivating relationships with legislators. And so this tool is designed to hopefully make that job a little easier and a little less stressful. Now, the importance of advocacy, I probably don't need to tell you, but by nurturing those relationships, by demonstrating impact, by showing that we're not just serving our audiences, but also their constituents, and that we're responsible stewards of public funds, hopefully we get to continue doing that work, get more funding, and do more towards our mission. I imagine a lot of you have experience making this case. So this is an example of a packet we would put together for Humanities on the Hill, talking about all of our work in a given congressional district across all of our programs. Now, these are really wonderful, and I think they do a great job of making that case, but they're a lot of work to make. It's just a lot of administrative overhead, from gathering the data, cleaning it, selecting it, and then making it so beautiful and presentable. And we do that with 10 congressional districts. Washington State has 49 state legislative districts. It gets to be impractical, especially if you were trying to do it more than once a year. What's more, as beautiful as those are, they are static, so they don't give you a lot of opportunity for supplying them on short notice. I'm told that on the days of legislative sessions, meetings get added, meetings get canceled. You don't always have time to ask your staff to quickly produce a packet like that for a given district. But we use Salesforce for the vast majority of our program management, and so all of that data is generally already there. What we're talking about is kind of sifting and presenting it. So it feels like it should be possible to just generate that data dynamically on the fly without all of this administrative work. Wouldn't that be nice? So that's my lead into the tech demo. So give me 1 second. I'm going to stop sharing my PowerPoint and start sharing a different part of my screen. Okay. And everyone's able to see this? Great. So I'll warn you, I'm going to take more than 20 seconds here, but not too much more. So we're in Salesforce right now for Humanities Washington. We're on the Advocacy tab. We've got all of our Washington legislators here, with the exception of U.S. senators. This is a district-based app, and they're statewide. We've got their photos, which I think is important because you don't always know the people you're about to meet. It's nice to have that to hand. Party affiliation is signified by the circle that surrounds them. It's searchable. We have a bunch of Joes and Joels, so I'll use that as an example. And you can also find folks by both congressional and legislative district. I think 37 I decided was a good one to show off. So the real magic happens though when you click on a legislator. In one moment while I move my Zoom window. So this gives you a bit of information about the legislator, any aides they have, or if they're board members from the council in their district. We've got a summary here, and it also gets broken down by events. You'll see that since this is this year, not just to the current date, there are some that don't have participants or audience because either they haven't happened yet or the data hasn't been reported. And you can change the year and go back and forth. The one thing I really want to emphasize with this, though, is that if I were to go into one of the events that you see marked on this map and change something like the audience size, all I would have to do is reload this tab and that data gets plugged in. So this is fully dynamic without all of the administrative overhead. I have sunk a lot of time to just fiddling around with it. I'm going to be responsible and not do that now and shift back to my PowerPoint. Okay. So I want to emphasize that this is very much kind of a 1.0 version of this project. And so I'm going to spend the rest of this time talking about features that I'd like to implement, and also what I think are going to be some of the drawbacks of shifting from a static to a dynamic system. The big one, grants. Right now, as you may have noticed, this only has events. So we want grants there, and we want to be able to also represent economic impact. We track things like honoraria and travel reimbursements in Salesforce, and that's all value that we're bringing to folks' districts. Evaluations, those go into Salesforce, and our program managers review them for which might be good to actually display. So there's no reason you shouldn't be able to click on an icon and have it give you a nice quote. Partner organizations. Legislators, I think, are very often familiar with a lot of the organizations in their district, so it would be nice to have a sidebar saying, here are the organizations in your district with whom we've worked or with which we've worked. There's a lot more we can do with the maps themselves. You should be able to get a lot of information about a given event by clicking on a map marker. We can also do all kinds of overlays with external data like census data. I'd also like to make it possible to add or subtract markers by program. And finally, photos. If you have a pipeline where event photos are going into Salesforce, there's no reason that once they've been approved internally for things like folks have said it's okay to share my likeness and the photo looks good, that you couldn't also have that when you click a marker, because a picture is worth 1,000 words. And I think it's good to be able to show folks really enjoying and finding our work meaningful. All right, but there are also drawbacks. And first and foremost among those, data hygiene. If you're like me, you clean your apartment before you have company and not that often apart from that. That's a little bit like what it is, I think, when we do a whole lot of data hygiene right before a planned advocacy session. But with a project like this, you kind of have to be ready at any moment to be presenting your data. So data hygiene really has to turn into a continuous, almost a daily task. Expertise. So this is not software from a third-party vendor. I coded this right in Salesforce. That has benefits. Namely, we don't have to pay for it, and Humanities Washington owns it. But you would also either need someone on staff who codes or consultants, which are expensive. The other thing is that it's extremely bespoke. This is coded right to the contours of Humanities Washington's database. It would not plug and play in other Salesforce databases, but with work, it could be made a bit more general and abstract where it could work with other databases, but you'd have some initial configuration to do. So, where does this type of program live? Where do I find the start date? Where do I find the status? Something like that could be generalized, but with some work. And the last slide, I'll just kind of make the point. I wanted to share this and to see what kind of interest there is from other councils. I think of it like we're all in the same house, but every room is a bit different. So every council, no two councils are the same, no two databases are the same, but we're all working towards the same mission. And yeah, that's really what I wanted to underline in presenting this tool. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing. How I don't think I went too much over. Okay, yeah. So that's the presentation.
That's great. Thanks, Tom. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much. Um, folks, and no, I think you're right on time. I think folks who are with us in the thing, could we get hands up from everybody, electronic hands up, or you can turn your cameras on and do a real hands up for councils that are using Salesforce. I know a lot of people use it, but not everybody. So I do want to see, we got New Jersey using Salesforce. Yeah, we think we need, yeah, I think uh, Pennsylvania went to Salesforce because New Jersey went to Salesforce. That's great. Now, I'd love for folks to, I have a couple questions that I'd like to ask Tom to kick off. And then, yes, Colleen is very impressed that he did it himself. Colleen, did you want to ask Tom a question about this? You can
I
either chat or...
honestly, yeah, no, I need to come off mute because this was so, I'm so impressed.
Oh,
I'm honestly wondering, like, where did you start with kind of figuring out the layout and how the module was going to work?
yeah, pencil and paper. I just it's a lot low cost just in terms of labor to sketch something out and go walk around to people and say, does this look right? And then from there, I demoed this for staff at Humanities Washington, got good feedback that informed a lot of the feature requests. Also, what's very nearly a bug, one problem you'll notice if you play around with it is that it puts one marker for every event. And that's a problem since we have some hosts that will host multiple events. And so it'll say 3 events and just have one marker. So that's something I'm going to need to fix for the future. But yeah, a lot of it's just requirements gathering and talking to the people who are going to use it about, what works, what doesn't. And thank you for the kind words. Yeah.
Being quiet, waiting for other people's questions.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So when you share with legislators, are you sharing like you're fine tuning it to what you want and then printing out a static version, or are you sharing something that's manipulatable?
That's a great question. So in a way, it's to be determined. We haven't used this yet. This is really brand new, just deployed.
If you're gonna call it, can we turn that down a little bit so I can hear better?
Oh, me?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah. So my thinking was that folks would have their Humanities Washington laptops on legislative visits, but if we're going to disseminate, by email, then we're going to do the very low-tech solution of taking a screenshot, I think, until I'm able to do an export button.
We have a question from Julia, who mentioned, and Rhode Island, who mentioned that grants data isn't included right now in your thing, Tom, but she asked, which is a great question, is the grants data somewhere in Salesforce, right? So is it just a matter of you're testing it out and you're going to pull it in, or is it somewhere else and you're going to have to import that data?
Yeah, that's a great question. We mostly use Foundant for like the first half of the administration of grants. So for collecting applications and then deciding, like sending them to reviewers and deciding awards. After that, I manually import the grants into Salesforce. So they are there, but there's a lag. Salesforce has a grants module, but every time about once a year I revisit it, I make the same decision I made the previous year, which is that it's prohibitively expensive. So the data is there after a lag is the short answer to that question.
So are you, given that you're saying you're not moving to the Salesforce grants module, right? Are you already thinking of, how are you thinking about getting the grant data in there? I'm sure you're thinking about it.
Oh yeah, yeah. It is there now. It's I mean it's CSV imports.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then it'll wind up on the handouts.
I think so. Yeah. I'll be curious. That's going to depend on staff feedback next time they go to Olympia. I will be curious if just the dynamicness of it, the ability to interact, is something that wows legislators and their staffs, or if it's just more important that they have something tangible to take away. It could be both. I think that one we'll just discover. Yeah.
I'm curious about both. This question, I guess, is both for you, Nick and Tom. I know that you both do a lot of this work for advocacy in your states. And so, Nick, when you create maps and things for your legislators based on the surveys and whatnot that you do, is that a printed item, or is it on an iPad and you are able to? So I
Those
mean, it's the difference between leaving behind something so they have it versus having something like that's dynamic that you can show them.
Yeah, we normally print it out and bring it, but before we print it out, it is a PDF. So our thank you notes normally include the PDF. We've definitely not tried to, we just haven't tried to do the dynamic thing in the offices. And then I'll say Pennsylvania has the largest full-time legislature. We have something like 500 legislators. So we are making choices. Tom, you said you're doing the 10 most likely to, can you say a little bit more about that? How you choose?
Yeah.
Like obviously it might be leadership, or it might be the people who they were able to get meetings with. What's the process there?
To my knowledge, those sort of packets I showed you, we put those together just for congressional, like federal legislators. I think it was much more on a one-off basis if someone was meeting with a state legislator. So we didn't really have a defined process. We certainly didn't try to put together 49 packets, one for each district. So with this, the thought of that, that's a lot of work. With this, hopefully just the process of managing the programs does the work for you.
Does Washington Humanities get funds from the state government? Are you getting an appropriation from them or something like that?
Yeah, so forgive me, I don't know, I won't be able to give you a comprehensive picture of that, but I know that we get a state award for our Speakers Bureau program, and we got a significant award to expand our primetime family reading program to help combat pandemic learning loss. So those are the two most recent ones that are in my mind. I'm sure someone who works with that more closely could give you a fuller answer. Sorry.
Oh no, I think that's fine. Just trying to get it, because I know some councils do get some councils do, and some councils don't go after state funds. So that's really all I was trying to.
I see.
Get at. All right. And then I have one last question, which is, did you come to Washington Humanities with this coding experience? Is this something you got while you were there? Why?
Yeah. So it's sort of a weird path. So before I came to Washington Humanities, I'm warning you, it's a weird path. I taught Latin and ancient Greek. And as part of that, I got into digital humanities. So I started learning to code to do maps with basically ancient Mediterranean studies. But I really enjoyed that work, and I thought, well, maybe this is applicable to some of the stuff we're doing here at Humanities Washington. So yeah, there is a humanities component. I see the heart. Thank you.
And after declinations in Greek and
That's right.
and Latin, you're like, this is really no problem, this coding stuff. So yeah, no, one for the humanities being the way into, like, who needs tech to go into humanities? One for humanities to go into tech. So that's fantastic. Well, thank you, Tom. No, that looks fantastic. I think all of the councils at some point or another are doing some sort of advocacy. So I think I hope everybody can relate, and I know I can relate to the, oh my God, it's so time consuming, and we spent 2 weeks on this thing, and then 3 of the 10 meetings got canceled. And none of the meetings last that long, right? 7 minutes or something like, we had tiny chunks of time. So thank you so much. That's really helpful. And keep us abreast of it, especially the people who are doing a lot of advocacy or the people who are doing a lot of Salesforce will be really interested in it. And I'm just going to ask Zainab, and then Zainab, where should it go? Where should he be putting this?
I'm so sorry. I was letting somebody into the chat, but it wasn't working. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, I can't fall asleep on this in this session. So where should Tom put all of this stuff so people can see it?
Oh, the member portal. I would really suggest that. That'd be great. No, I'm really excited. First off, Tom, incredible presentation. That's so exciting. I'm a former Salesforce user, so I was like, ooh, so fun. I miss it so much. But yes, I hope that we can have all of our lovely content that we're getting from this in the member portal. And then also we can maybe make a post about it if people want to share. I was thinking maybe there could be like a Salesforce committee that or forum that people could kind of share their thoughts. And I don't know, I'm thinking about stuff. Okay.
That's great. Okay. So thank you so much, Tom. We're going to move on to Lian and Becky. Are you guys ready? All right. I need a minute to pull up your presentation and get it going. Please give me 1 second. All right. Okay. All right. Is this coming through? Teresa, can you see this?
Yes, sir.
All right. Okay, without further ado.
Thanks, Nick. Hi, everyone. I'm Lian Partridge. I'm the grants manager at Connecticut Humanities. And today my colleague Becky and I are going to be presenting on something I think a lot of us do, which is a grant making evaluation. So this year we worked with an external evaluator to take a look at the last 5 years of grant making. And we had her do both a quantitative and a qualitative analysis. So a quantitative looking at the data over the last 5 years, and then also qualitative doing interviews with different grantees and applicants over the last 5 years. And this is data that we share publicly, but we also use to help us to determine how best to manage our funds and also any updates that we need to be making to our grant making program. So this is something we've done 3 years. The first time was back in 2014 with data going back to 2012, which is when we first started using Foundant, which made that process a lot easier of doing the descriptive analysis. And the intent was that we wanted to be able to track some items longitudinally and go year over year with that. Next one.
Sorry.
No, thanks, Nick. With the quantitative analysis, we basically exported 5 years of grant making data and gave it to our evaluator and had her look at a huge range of things that we thought might be interesting or notable. Things like looking at geographic spread, the success rate of first-time applicants, looking at different organization sizes and types, different grant lines. And we had her present this to us graphically, primarily because previous iterations of our evaluation were very text heavy and therefore not really used throughout the year. So she provided a bunch of graphs and we basically selected the ones that we thought would be most notable. We also had her reach out to applicants from the last 5 years, 31 of which set up interviews with her. And we had her ask them things like, if they had any feedback about the application process, about the acceptance or decline process, if they had any suggestions, and particularly if there were any funding gaps, especially now as pandemic funding is kind of dipped, seeing what organizations felt was most needed and where they're kind of seeing funding pulling away and where we can kind of step in and help them as much as possible. So before we talk about findings, I wanted to talk about some of the challenges that we had. First is we want to compare evaluations over the previous evaluations, but due to the pandemic and staff capacity, we don't have even numbers of years. So it makes some of the comparisons we want to do actually quite difficult to do accurately. Another area is that our director is very interested in knowing how organizations that are BIPOC-led or primarily BIPOC-serving compare to the rest of our grantee population. And this is just not information that we reliably collect. So this wasn't something that we could present reliably, and that made that area difficult. And then our third challenge really was that the pandemic dumped a bunch of funding into one of our grant lines in particular. And that kind of skewed all of our data, where it's never had that much funding. It will probably never have that much funding again. And so it was a challenge figuring out how to include that grant line without kind of completely skewing all of our data.
Thanks, Lian. My name is Becky Vitkauskas, and I'm the Grants Assistant at Connecticut Humanities. Next, we want to talk a bit about some of what we learned from the evaluation. This will include key findings for you and other notes that may be of interest. Then we'll talk briefly about what we've done with this data. First, I want to talk about the core grant applicant feedback report, or the qualitative data. Communication with Connecticut Humanities staff emerged as a crucial factor in the application process. People really appreciated the opportunity to talk through the process with us, as well as our availability to assist and answer questions and our draft review process. Despite occasional frustrations with the process and disappointments in application results, respondents overwhelmingly expressed a willingness to apply for grant funds from Connecticut Humanities again. Many organizations emphasized the need for operating support, even though this was not a direct question asked of them, and noted the ongoing necessity for diversified funding and strategic approaches to securing resources. Also, applicants wanted more opportunities to connect with each other and similar organizations. Some applicants found the applications repetitive with overlap between some questions. And finally, quick grants are overall not worth the time of smaller organizations. Next, some findings on the grant making evaluation summary report, or the quantitative data. In the past 2 fiscal years, the number and proportion of core grant applicants from smaller organizations has increased. There's been a similar increase in the proportion of core grantees with small to mid-sized annual operating expenses, which we classify as below $850,000. Quick grants were by far the most heavily utilized grant line and represented half of all our core awards, 242 out of 409 awards. So what have we done with this data? First, we've shared this information in a few different ways. We've presented our findings to our board of directors to keep them apprised of what we've learned. This was also a discussion item for our most recent application review committee meeting, where they discussed potential changes to applications and processes. The evaluation was shared to subscribers in an e-newsletter. And last, the final reports were published on our website with some contextualizing information and highlights of the findings. We've also used this data in a few different ways so far. We are reviewing grant applications for options to simplify and streamline them. With the results demonstrating an emphasis on quick grants, this tells us we need to focus on improving that specific line. We're currently investigating cohort grant making for more opportunities to gather, network, and learn. This was an idea we had prior to the evaluation, but the results provide data to support this path. We're also using data to advocate for increased funding available for regranting. And some final takeaways to share with you. Interviewees were appreciative of the effort Connecticut Humanities was taking to gather feedback. They appreciated being seen and heard beyond the application. And our aim is not to have findings reported on and forgotten about, but instead to use it to guide decision-making in the organization. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. Right. Now my question for the group is, who has had a consultant evaluate your work or take a look at your grant lines and make recommendations the way Connecticut Humanities has? Come on. I heard somebody yesterday say they hired a data scientist. I would count that. I should put my hand up. I know we do this all the time. Not find a way to put my hand up. Okay. Folks, questions for Connecticut Humanities about how they did the evaluation, what kind of data they shared, and maybe what they got back from the consultants and what they learned? I'm just gonna chill out and wait for some questions.
Oh, I'll jump in, and also sorry for yelling earlier. My dog was
Jackie, and so sorry. I think this is really fantastic, and I wish we could say we've done this. Definitely wanting to engage outside reviewers as a result of just being inspired by this gathering. So kudos to everyone who's doing that. Did you guys, when you were doing the data kind of analysis, did you include looking at the outcomes of the grants that you were funding as well, or more kind of structurally about the program? It seems to be really great data, but I think the question we always get is, how do we talk about outcomes for a really diverse range of projects? So I didn't know if that was something you guys wanted to tackle or are putting off for another thing.
Yeah, so in the interview portion, that there was a question about, have these grants helped you to increase your impact or to make the impact that your organization hopes to make? We didn't do that with the kind of descriptive analysis of the data. And the intention was more to be looking at the program and whether the program is working, and then hopefully capturing the impact of the grant projects themselves in other ways. So that's not something that we had a huge emphasis on, but it was sort of touched on in one of the interview questions.
Gotcha. Thanks so much. There's a question in the chat from Julia about it's awesome that you've been able to do this multiple times in the last 10 years. Is this part of your annual operating budget, or did you get a grant to do this work?
Yeah, so this is part of our operating budget. I would say that one of the recommendations that Becky and I made this year for the next time that we want to do this is that now we use Foundant at CTH, and I think a lot of the descriptive analysis are things that are not difficult to get out of Foundant, especially with some of the updates that they've been making. And a lot of the labor in this was really helping our external consultant to even understand, our messy data. And so using our time more to clean up our own data and then to do that internally, I think the fear from our leadership was that we would then be skewing our own data, but we ended up selecting what we thought was most notable anyway. So I think if we took that part out, we could cut the cost in half. We definitely need someone external to be doing the interviews. So this round cost us $15,000, and in the future, we're hoping it'll be around $6,000.
I have a follow-up question about the budget line item. I'm wondering if this is something that was already part of the budget when you arrived, or was it something that you had to advocate for?
Yeah, I came on board about 3 years ago, and so this was something that was already in process. It was initially, the goal was that it would be done every 3 years. The second time they did it, it kind of stretched to 4, and then this time it was 5. So we're going to try and keep it more regular, but not knowing our staffing and things like the pandemic, it's a little bit hard to make sure that it's the same.
Thank you for that.
Would you be willing to, you mentioned an issue that I think we're all having, which is being able to look at grant giving for BIPOC or non-BIPOC organizations. And I know, we've, just the way you laid it out where you were like BIPOC led, BIPOC serving, could you just talk a little bit about maybe the challenges that you faced? And I know you said it's not data you're collecting consistently, but I think it's more about it's data that's not, and maybe not anywhere consistent and maybe difficult to collect consistently.
So we have a general operating support line that we were able to offer during the pandemic. And as a part of that, one of our goals was to collect survey data to better understand the cultural sector in Connecticut. So this was we were very lucky to get a huge amount of money from the state. So this was a non-competitive operating support grant. And as a part of the survey that we sent out that was mandatory, with the grants. One of the questions, so all the questions on the survey, most of them were optional, even though it was mandatory to do the survey. And one of the questions was something like, select all that apply in describing your organization. And it had a bunch of different options, things like we're BIPOC led, we're primarily BIPOC serving, we're LGBTQ plus led, we're primarily LGBTQ plus serving. So we had a bunch of options like that. The problem was that organizations were self-identifying, and then there were places that, as we were looking at the data, some of our partners in this process were identifying organizations that were definitely self-identifying in ways that weren't accurate. And so then they started to have concerns about using this data. And then additionally, because we don't attach this to our other grants, so we're not finding it out from all of our grantees, just for everyone who applied to this operating support grant. And so I didn't feel comfortable taking the organizations that were in that separate group and seeing how many of them were also in our regular grant pool and then making assumptions based on that. So I think one of the things we've suggested is, if this is something we really need to collect, it somehow needs to be a part of the application process without it ever influencing the application process, which is where the snag is and where our board is very much not comfortable. So that's just something that we've kind of been going back and forth on, with whether or not we really should be using this list of organizations that we've considered in this category.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that, and thank you for sharing all the ins and outs. I expect there are a lot of people nodding off screen about having this exact issue and these exact desires. Can I just ask anybody else who'd like to share if you've done this, or if you've had difficulty doing it, or if it's been raised in your council and there's some discussion? I'll also say, certainly we use the term BIPOC, but I even have a survey in the field right now where in the Pittsburgh area, because a partnering organization doesn't use that term, in that area they're using the term global majority. So there are other terms, there are really other terms as well. And so I just want to throw it out there for a little bit more discussion about council's experience in this area.
Hi, Nick. This is Mark Hallett in Chicago. I'm actually logged in as Rebecca Amato. Don't tell Rebecca. I'm bound to make her look bad. She's an amazing colleague. So thank you. So this presentation was fantastic. Thank you so much to Connecticut, right? That was amazing. I was just gonna say that since 2020, at Illinois Humanities, we've asked about the race or ethnicity of executive directors in every grant cycle. And and we have a variety of different grants programs. So I should say that we also face a similar issue where it's been inconsistent, but we're now aligning everything. But what we've heard from cultural groups is that a lot of groups, even groups that are BIPOC led, do not use Alana, they do not use BIPOC, etc. And so when we ask it, we're not saying, are you led by, and then use one of those like terms. We ask, please select all that apply, and please indicate the race or ethnicity of your executive director. And then please select all that apply, and it has a list of racial categories, and including not listed, including we do not have an ED, etc. But so the reason we do this is that our KPIs currently really focus in on two things. And there's more, but essentially the things that we're tracking are non-Cook County grants. So Chicago is located in Cook County. So historically, we've given more money to Chicago area groups or Cook County groups. So we took a bold goal from the New York Humanities a couple of years ago and said we want to make sure that at least 50% of our money is going outside of Cook County. So that's one thing. And the second is BIPOC led. And surprisingly, we've found that we're actually really close to funding more than 50% Cook County and close to 50% BIPOC led, which I honestly would have thought sort of almost impossible like a year ago. But as we've made these things more and more of a goal, you keep leaning into it and getting closer and closer. So anyway, so just to share a little bit about our experience, and we'd always, be willing to share any application forms with others, etc.
That's great. Teresa, I think this could be a whole discussion on Research Forum one day, sort of addressing research issues related to BIPOC, Alana, global majority. Teresa, I'm not going to let you say anything because we're going to move to the next one after. Julia, you had your hand up for a while. If we could just get your question in. Oh, Hannah's having the same. I'm shocked that the same conversation is being held everywhere. So I think this is great. It's a great topic. Julia, what was your question?
Oh yeah, well, I was also had just a comment on this topic that, similar to Lian, we only really our pandemic era American Rescue Plan Act grant making program explicitly prioritized groups that fit the definition of BIPOC centered. And we actually did that program in partnership with our state arts council, and they had developed a BIPOC centered definition, which was actually super narrow and actually way more narrow than it turned out we wanted it to be. There were organizations that didn't fit it that we thought that we wanted to be prioritized. But in any case, I just wanted to throw in too that the recent Supreme Court affirmative action decision and kind of the continued uncertainty about how that is going to be applied, or does it apply to philanthropy, and the kind of like lawsuits following that have also, entered our thinking around how are we asking about and framing racial and ethnic composition in our grant making. And I know we're not talking necessarily about weighting that in a decision, but even just collecting the data, exactly the points that you mentioned, Lian, like how is that framed? How do our applicants trust us to be handling that data? How are we handling that data? To what use are we putting it? So just putting in there that Supreme Court decision has also kind of entered our discussion in terms of this whole conversation.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, Teresa, I'm really going to say we need a whole thing on this. All right.
Agreed.
Okay, last one. I'm going to try and do mine quite quickly. I'm going to do 15 seconds for a slide, so we have hopefully a little time left at the end for more chit chat. We'll see how well that goes. So I am presenting on, we do some surveying here at PA Humanities. We have a survey we call Culture Check. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit, it's only a little bit about the findings. It's more, I think, about the ins and outs of surveying and how it got going and where it is. And so I think it's hopefully relevant to other folks who are doing surveys. Right. Okay, as I said, we have a survey right now. It is right now in the field for its, depending on how you count, second or third year, called PA Culture Check. We started it at the very end of the, okay, so right at the very end of the pandemic, the nerd bat signal went out. As soon as people got settled, we got almost immediate questions for data from all sorts of people, right? So from organizations themselves, from legislators. And so we started doing surveys then. Then after the pandemic, we moved into what we call the Cultural Growth and Recovery Survey, where we were basically asking people, are you okay? And then we've moved on and developed it into a Culture Check, where we really are asking people, where are we going now? We partner with Greater Philadelphia Cultural Alliance, and this year the Greater Pittsburgh Arts Council. It has two components, a survey, and then we do listening sessions. And when we're done, we report out. We've gotten very, very good press coverage. This is, I don't know if it means anything anymore, but above the fold on the Philadelphia Inquirer, on the findings from last year, especially on performing arts organizations, which we work on with our partners because they do everything, including we wouldn't normally do performing arts, but we really are looking at the whole community. And then, our roadmap, we share back to who participated. We're trying to get involvement. Pennsylvania is a big state. So here we have more surveys coming from, you might expect, the heavily populated area, but we try and make sure it's representative of the state overall. And we've been doing a pretty good job. We were underrepresented of Pittsburgh. Again, we're doing the whole sector, performing arts. We have a lot of representation in sort of museums and of course in the libraries area, because all three organizations have very good participation there. This is our third year. We have this question, when do you think attendance is going to get back to normal? In our first year, only 11% said it was back to normal. Then we got 36%, and preliminary this year is half. But that still means more than half of organizations are not back to where they were. You can see that there's a real difference among the elements of the sector, where the performing arts attendance suffered the most and did not get back to where it was, and the museums had a better time. We have another question we have asked repeatedly about volunteers. And again, volunteers are still affected by the hangover from the pandemic, with about half of organizations say they have fewer. Again, this is different by different sectors. Here, it's the libraries and the museums that are having more difficulty compared to the community and education organizations, with performing arts in the middle. We ask people about what kind of issues they're working on. And I love this slide. You can see all the great things people are doing: education, youth development, climate, job preparation, veterans issues. And the reason we do this is to share that arts and culture and humanities organizations are not off in their own corner doing their own thing. They're integrated with the community. Almost everybody's partnering to deliver programs. Almost 3/4 are partnering with schools, which is sort of the #1 single type of organization. Listening sessions. In addition to the survey, we ask people to participate in listening sessions to get qualitative data. We do get a little more quantitative data there. You can see asking about what they're doing. And then they give us feedback on the data itself. So in response to that chart about is your attendance back to where it was, we're getting people saying, there's a new normal. Maybe it's not going to go back to what it was before. And then it's just a great quote about elected officials wanting to know how the arts can help them get their downtowns back and running. All right. During the survey, I am basically a carnival barker. I am offering to sit people's pets. I'm offering to plow or shovel their driveways if they'll do my survey. But really, it just speaks to you need trusted partners to get the word out. And then the other thing is, you really want to share everything with people well afterwards, especially the people who participated. And I'm sure we'll share this. We've got some resources here if you're doing surveying. There's just some great resources out there. This year, we're having a problem. We have over 600 responses, but more than half of those responses are from bots, which people are training to take surveys and are messing up my data. But we still have a fair number, but it took us a little while to figure out how to deal with that. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much. I really want to get back to our discussion, but thanks so much to everybody for being here. And maybe just a quick question: what other councils who are here today are doing surveys? Connecticut. Wow, lots of people are doing surveys. Washington. I knew Rhode Island, and I think Florida is doing surveys, and somebody else. So any questions about surveying, any questions about robots, or anything else related to surveys?
Nick, I'm happy to talk about bots, but I know that might be.
Go for it.
So I'll put a pin in that. I don't know if anyone has more substantive stuff though they want to talk about.
I was gonna just ask you, Nick, if you could talk a little bit about how surveys evolve, because you said this is the third year of this survey, and there is this idea that, oh, you want to see how things are changing, so you need year over year information. So how do you go about choosing how to begin to evolve some of the questions that you're asking as a way to grow, this?
Yeah, we
the
start,
data set?
we'll start in the spring with our partners, and we'll see what kind of questions came out of the listening sessions, which ones got great responses. This question about, we didn't pick ahead of time what would be the evergreen questions, right? But it just came out that this question showing in the beginning that only 11% of organizations were back to where they were 2 years after the pandemic was something that, we were getting feedback that was like, oh, from legislators, we thought this was over, right? Like we thought everything was back to where it was. And so that became a question that we had to ask over and over again in order to be able to track it. And then beyond that, we've kept about 4 questions from year to year. And then we're really, as you say, that everything evolves. And so, we're moving from, it's not about the pandemic anymore, even though there are a few of these questions there. It's really about how organizations are doing, but it's just, that's how it started, with the pandemic. And I think it's just natural, like people turned away from that to other issues. And there was a little bit of a transition, which was like, what are you keeping from the pandemic versus what is new? And now it's really questions about, what's working, right?
Thanks for that. Go ahead, Tom. You want to say something about bots?
Yeah, a scourge for me as well. If you've already got a CAPTCHA there and they're getting through that, which I'm also finding, I have not tried this yet, but I know if you're hosting the survey on your own website, even if it's just like embedding a third-party page somewhere, but the domain is Pennsylvania Humanities, there's a service called Cloudflare. The main thing they offer on their free plan is protection against people like flooding your site with junk traffic to try to knock it offline. But they also have like a bot prevention feature that might be paid, but for a small organization, their fees are usually pretty reasonable. So I don't know, I can't vouch for them personally, but it might be worth looking into.
Yeah, I think this is the first time we've experienced the bot thing. Like it had been a full year. Like when we launched it last year, ChatGPT had just come out, and so there just weren't so many people messing around with bots. And so we were a little, at the end of the first week when we had 200 responses, we were just really excited. We were like, wow, people really love this survey. And then it turned out to be bots. So. All right, that's great. Well, I want to thank all of our participants today. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you for coming and joining the conversation. Thanks especially to the people who prepared presentations, Tom, Lian, and Becky. We really, really appreciate you. It was great to hear what everybody is doing, and I just think we've gotten so many directions I think everybody's going to want to know about Tom's. They're going to want to hire Tom to do their thing. So Tom's going to get to play with Salesforce like 24 hours, all the councils. And then, leading off of Lian and Becky, Teresa, I think we really need to do something about this, this issue of how organizations are tracking BIPOC stuff. And I forget who it was. It was, I don't know if it was Adrian or if it was Julia who was pointing out, there's real issues, right, related to Supreme Court decisions, and also just related to the reception you would get in your state capital about whether or not you're doing this kind of work and how you're doing it. And you might get 2 radically different responses. So I don't know, we'll just, that's stuff to think about. Teresa, I'm going to give you the last word.
I totally wholeheartedly agree with what Nick said about we need to convene some kind of group to start talking about this. But I also want to thank everybody for coming. Thank you so much for those folks that shared their work with us. We're looking forward to more of this type of session so that we can get more sharing. and share the love of all that work that's going on in all of your little areas of the world, especially the surveys, the demographics, the grant work, the evaluations, all of that knowledge. You know, you're really part of the collective, right? The collective expertise here. So thank you so much for joining. Just a little reminder to visit the lobby so that you can give feedback on this session. I put the link in the chat, and we are looking forward to the next session. In a half an hour, you will be able to join Hannah from the NEH just for an open office hour. Just chat, say hello, ask questions. We'll look for you there. Thank you so much.